kick off, and then
Okay,
once we
great.
kick off, if you want to drop in, that'd be great.
Great. All right, we'll start things off. My name is Derek Gunderson, and on behalf of the Northwestern Center on Law, Business, and Economics, our Workforce Science Project, we're really happy to have everyone here today for a great discussion. And at this point, I will turn it over to Richard Rosenow from One Model. Richard.
Perfect. Thank you, Derek. And hi, everybody. Good to see everyone on today. This is Richard Rosenow. I'm the VP of People Analytics Strategy at One Model. I am delighted to be here today with Bethany Dolman from AbbVie and Sam Orlov from Granger. Thank you both for being here today. As always, throughout the chat, as folks are listening in, if you have questions that come up, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that, kind of seeing what's going on. We've got a couple good questions for our panelists today, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So without further ado, Sam and Bethany, thank you both for joining us. I'd like to kick us off with something a little bit different. So we won't go right to intros right away, but would love to hear from you. What pathway did you take to get into the field of people analytics? And how have you seen those paths change over time? And Sam, why don't you kick us off today?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Richard. And it's great to be with everyone here today. It's awesome seeing some friendly names, at least in the chat. So maybe unsurprisingly, I came into people analytics by way of IO psychology. I finished my program 7 years ago and took an internship while I was in grad school with Marriott Vacations, helping to manage our engagement survey. And at the end of the internship, there was an open role on the compensation team. They approached me and said, would love to keep you around. Here's what we have open right now. Are you interested? And I was interested in compensation, but I respectfully said, I don't see that as my career path. And thankfully, my boss at the time said, okay, well, let us pause and think about what other opportunities there could be. And they came back with a talent analytics role. There was no talent analytics team at the time, so it was pretty undefined, and it was incredibly appealing to me. Well, first off, let me point out that in my program, the terms people analytics, talent analytics, HR analytics were never used. But it was appealing to me because of the idea of being able to touch so many different parts of HR in the business. So like I said, I had an interest in compensation, but I also had an interest in talent acquisition and training and engagement. And this seemed like a really cool opportunity to understand the connection points between all of them and effects and change. The second part of your question, Richard, I actually am interested to know from others who have been in the field a little bit longer how the entrant points into people analytics have changed. I have some good hypotheses about that. From what I've seen, both from my current team and other groups, is I've gleaned that I think in the field, it feels like we started off with a lot of generalists, especially as companies had smaller teams, people who could do a lot of different things between, research, reporting, dashboard building, consulting. And as people analytics teams have gotten larger, we've been able to recruit from other areas as we move to more specialists. So I've definitely seen a move to bringing in people with data science backgrounds, data engineering backgrounds, consulting backgrounds, and of course, there will always be a need for IO psychologists. Luckily, I do want to point out for the crowd before I pass it over to Bethany that I don't always mention this, but I graduated with a master's in IO psychology, and if there's anyone on the call who's currently in grad school or a recent grad, I went through sort of the phase of, do I need a doctorate to be in this space? And just take it for what it's worth. There are plenty of roles in organizations where that skill set is valuable. I've been able to find my way with a master's, and so I just want to show some love for those grads as well.
That's some fantastic advice, Sam. And I'll say too, even hearing you say that 7 years ago, people analytics, HR analytics wasn't mentioned in the program. I think that's something we've seen start to change again too. Even at a SIOP a couple of weeks ago, there was one session that had probably 400 people in the room learning about people analytics careers. And so I think that's an interesting kind of pathway shift that's sort of been adopted by IO psychology now as a formal pathway you can head into, and in just a short period of time. Like that's not that long ago. At least I keep telling myself that's not that long ago. But it's so it's exciting to see kind of that transition already. And I appreciate your advice to folk too on the IO side. Bethany, we would love to hear your story too.
Yeah.
How did you find your way over to people analytics?
Glad to share it. I have a more untraditional background than Sam does. Sam, yours makes sense. I'm not sure that mine makes as much sense. But back, my background is I have a master's in statistics and then a PhD in quantitative psychology. And the reason I decided on that was I did not know how to combine psychology and statistics. So I had to find a program that took these two somewhat different fields of study and combined them into one. So I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do in college. So I picked two majors and then didn't know what to do for a job. So I found a grad program. I keep saying I punted downfield on that one, and came up with this, how do we use data to tell a story? How do we use it to better understand people? So I got my start in, say, people analytics before people analytics was a thing, in a great program. So I worked at State Farm in their research department for about 7 years. And there were a bunch of IO psychologists on the team. I was kind of the oddball there, where I was a stats person who was learning how to be a psychologist. So I've taken one IO class my entire life. I got my mileage out of it though, because I've been doing it for about 15 years now. I at State Farm kind of learning what IO psychology is, but not in HR. And so I think the big transition outside of just general research, we were doing business research. I was doing claims modeling, I was training actuaries, to now being focused in on how do we use data to impact employees. And I think that was a big unlock for me personally, was I'm good at making the company money, but I can have more of an impact to improve the performance of the organization and to allow people to take care of their families for those employees. So more of a passion and a mission around that. I will tell you that Buddy Benj taught me everything I knew about people analytics. I worked with him for about 1.5 years. And I had no experience with HR. I was business facing, so I didn't understand how HR worked together. And that was a great, strong HR program that taught me what talent management was, what talent acquisition was, different data sets that I had never had access to, and how do we weave all those together to put together compelling reasons that are tied to those business results. After Monsanto, I spent a couple of years at Nike. They had not been doing employee surveys. They had not been doing centralized HR analytics. And so I was actually on the total rewards team there for about a year, and then stood up kind of more centralized HR analytics while I was there. I am now at AbbVie, and that's the role that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, my team is a little bit different than typical people analytics. We kind of spun off from our people insights team, and we're really focusing in on employee research. So how do we better understand employee experience? And I'll talk more about kind of with that role, but it's getting out of some of the operational work and really elevating HR analytics to the point where we're part of those strategic discussions at the enterprise level, at our executive leadership team level. So I think the most important, and it's funny because those traditional, I hired somebody that majored in art history, but was a fantastic people analytics person. So while there are kind of people that are naturally born to do this, that go to school to train, I will also argue that it's a fantastic thing to find yourself into. And transparently, just a great community of people. People that are willing to help out, that are willing to mentor, that are willing to help you figure out what your place is. So leverage the resources that you can. And then also realize that some of us are just making up as we go too. This is a very constantly evolving thing around what does this actually mean? And it changes.
I think that's a really good point to take to heart. I think, Bethany, what you said too about how your team is sort of changing too, even beyond what a traditional centralized people analytics team looks like. What does that look like next? I think that's fascinating too, because some of us are still trying to get to traditional people analytics. Then, like, how does it even grow further? I think it speaks to the fact that this field is still in motion. We're not a structured set. There's not a single way to do this yet. And I love that both of you kind of shared your career paths there too. Thank you both for kind of sharing how you found us here. So maybe taking it a step deeper here, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your company and then your role in the team. And why don't, Bethany, we kind of touched on a little bit with you already. Why don't we jump to Sam, and then I'll take it further. We'll dig a little deeper into the team too.
Yes. So I lead the we call it talent analytics at Grainger. At least for the time being, we're actually going through a job architecture, and we've decided to switch to people analytics for what it's worth. So I'll be curious to see if there's any consolidation of our nomenclature in the field going forward. But yeah, I lead the team. After we fill the role that's open currently, there will be 4 of us total, supporting a workforce of around 25,000. So Grainger, hopefully, if you're in the Chicagoland area, you've heard our name. Typically, when I mention the company, it's about 50-50 recognition, even for a Fortune 300 organization. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Grainger, we're a wholesale distributor, broadline. The industry we're in is called MRO. It's maintenance, repair, and operational equipment. So we are the wholesale distributor for everything from PPE to large manufacturing equipment. We've got enterprise customers, typically medium to larger enterprise customers, both government, public, and private sector. So as you can imagine, we have a fairly traditional workforce in the sense that we've got a fairly large frontline population in our warehouses, call centers. We have a large sales organization as well, and then of course our corporate support centers as also. So the Richard, did you already ask about the open role on the team?
Not yet. Let's hold that for a second. I want to make sure. No, you're doing good.
Yeah.
You're doing good. Let's jump back over to Bethany. Bethany, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your team and about AbbVie too.
For sure. So for those of you that haven't heard of AbbVie, I also find it 50-50 on who's heard of it. Once I start talking about it, they're like, oh, I know that commercial, or I've known somebody that have it. We are a global biopharmaceutical company. So about 52,000 employees located just north of Chicago. We make medicines for people to kind of cure some of their symptoms that come from diseases. So you may have heard of our main drug was Humira. It's actually the reason that we spun off from Abbott just over 10 years ago. Immunology, but we also have some other assets in that area. You may have seen Rinvoq or Skyrizi commercials. I know I was watching Shark Tank the other day, and it was like everything was an AbbVie commercial. I was like, that we know our crowd. We also, about 2 years ago, bought an organization, a big M&A activity that took us from 30,000 to 50,000 overnight, called Allergan Aesthetics. If you haven't heard of that, you may have heard of Botox. So we bought the company that makes Botox, medical, cosmetic, and really kind of expanding our portfolio when it comes to that. But we traditionally make, drugs that help save people's lives. Immunology, like I mentioned, oncology, neuroscience, things like eye care and women's health. So lots of good kind of, the passion is not lost on our employees. We come together to help cure those diseases and to make sure that people are able to live full lives. So it's a place that we play a lot of patient videos at things, and we'll start off big all hands meetings with a patient video, and everybody cries. So it's like, just distribute the tissues beforehand, because it's fantastic to see. I show up every day. I work in HR. I'm not curing cancer, but I'm supporting the team that is working on that.
That's fantastic. That mission orientation is something that's special to, and I think most companies try to find it, but it's nice when it actually comes through naturally, and that's exciting. So before we get to the actual roles, it'd be nice to learn a little bit more about your teams. And so you as a team, and kind of maybe speaking for your broader team too within your group, could you talk about what success looks like for that unit? So thinking about like, what is success for a people analytics team within your company, or what is success for you? And then there's broad versions too, but there's also like those nuances of, hey, within our company, this is success for me. It'd be really great if you could kind of share that with the group here. And Bethany, why don't we start with you?
Sam, do you want to go first? You want me to go first? I can go first. I didn't talk much about my team. I did mention that we kind of split off from what was formerly known as the People Insights team. And so if you think about it, there's the team that maintains the dashboards, that might build new dashboards, that's in charge of education of our HR practitioners that controls that delivery of our single source of truth dashboarding type stuff. And I say dashboards a lot because that's a lot of what they do is in that space. My team is a little bit different from that. And we have a couple of big remits that we go after. So one is we produce monthly articles that get sent out to all employees and more targeted towards all people leaders in the organization. And we take in the data that we have either through HRIS systems or through our ATS, or we own we own our employee listening as well. We take all that data and we put together really useful insights, action-oriented insights, and those get sent out to every single people leader every month. So we have this cadence of us doing internal research, us looking at the external market, and then what do we know works here at AbbVie. So that's one part, is kind of this, how do we use our own data to better ourselves? The second thing I mentioned is employee listening, employee survey. We actually call it our organizational dialogue strategy. It goes beyond just an annual survey, even though we run that and put together all the results for that. It goes beyond that. Where do we do pulses? Where do we do listening sessions? I say for this is that I want to be able to connect the dots, but I first need to collect the dots. And so by my team owning that, I know that the right questions are being asked and that we're going to have the information that we need, the context that we need to be able to connect those dots. The third big bucket of what we do is all around external. And so industry consortium partnerships, academics, we have a couple of different partnerships with academic organizations with professors there that are looking at our data, and we're kind of collaborating to get more of an unbiased opinion on what should we be working on. So kind of third big bucket around that. And then the fourth one, I know that this seems like 5 jobs all put into one. I promise that it's a lot of impact, but it's the right work to be doing. We also do consulting with our executive leadership team. And the example that I can give around that is, we get questions around, I always say the difference between my team and the dashboarding team is if you want to know how many people are turning over, you go to the dashboarding team. If you want to know why, or is that good or is that bad, they come to me. And so we do a lot of consulting projects at our executive leadership team level to better understand what's the market doing? What does market external availability look like? What are other companies experiencing at the same time? There's new metrics that we want to develop. So here's maybe something that we haven't collected before. How do we do those metrics in a way that is consistent, that's structured, that's been well maintained and audited so that we can get that out in front of leaders? So we're more on that, setting the strategy, really treating HR metrics as we do with all of our other financial business metrics with that same level of rigor and data quality when it comes to that. So the team that I sit on, we sit within our talent organization as part of our organizational excellence team. So it's my team of org research. We also have org design and org culture. And then a new function that's just getting started, a new practice is what we call them, a new practice getting started around teams. So how do we put together teams in a way outside of just, who do you roll up to, but cross-functional teams? How do we really crack the code on team effectiveness? So the 4 practices within org excellence, we all collaborate. This is kind of our think tank when it comes to consulting and to research within our HR organization.
That's incredibly helpful and super interesting to kind of hear, because that's a rare setup, and that's
very rare, different.
I really liked what you said about the monthly articles too around action-oriented insights. To have that direct feed from your team, even though a small team, directly to all the people leaders on a monthly cadence about like, hey, here's something that you need to know and you should be thinking about a little differently.
Exactly.
I would love to see an example of that sometime if you ever have one you can share, because that's a very cool thing to do.
We can talk offline.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, Sam, it'd be great to hear from you too. What does success look like for your team? Oh, Sam, you're on mute for me.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah. So quickly, just to give everyone an idea of sort of the work that our team does and how we're set up, before getting to your direct question, Richard. So like I mentioned, there's 4 of us. I like to think we do a lot of similar work as maybe Bethany's 2 groups, but combined into one. Up until this point, we've really been structured around a group of generalists. And so myself and the other members of our team wear a lot of different hats. We're the ones doing the dashboarding, creation, consulting with HR, deriving insights, deep dive research or advanced analytics, upskilling HR. I put all of that sort of into 3 buckets. We kind of have a self-service model, right, which is the creation of dashboards and directing our users to those tools. We have a full service model, which is, if there's information that you can't get from a self-service tool, to Bethany's point of why is turnover going up, not just how many team members our employees are leaving, then our team can provide sort of that full service research suite. And then the third bucket is, for us, has really been around upskilling HR to leverage the tools and derive insights on their own too. What success looks like for us, honestly, one, it does depend on the role. Now that we are hiring a role that's dedicated full time to research, the success of what that role looks like, which I think we'll touch upon in a minute, does look a little bit different than someone else on our team whose primary responsibility is consulting with our HR business partners and COEs. As a group, though, I would say it's evolved over time, and I think if you think about it sort of as a hierarchy of needs when it comes to analytics, our team was really created only 3.5 years ago or so. And at that point, the roadmap was within HR, we just need access to data. Just plain, like, we don't have access to the information we need. Luckily, we've gotten to the point now where we've been able to evolve to, okay, we have access to information. Now we have to focus on the reliability and the consistency of that information in one source of truth. And we feel like we're in a pretty good place there now, where we can shift our focus and evolve a little bit more into answering the key questions that are posed by our business leaders, and really starting to show impact. And so it's evolved, and for those, I'm sure that that probably is a similar, other people analytics teams have been in a similar position of their roadmap over time. I would say the one consistent across all of our roles that I always look for, however, when it comes to a measure of success, is how well we are able to consult with our stakeholders to truly understand what their needs are, and delivering that. The phrase that I've been really leaning into recently is, we need to slow down in order to speed up. And too often I see requests come in and we deliver, but then there's rework that happens when it's like, oh, well, this isn't actually what I needed. Can you add in this field into the data set, or can you actually provide X, Y, and Z? And so regardless of the position on our team, whether it's a contractor who's doing more basic reporting, all the way through myself or a senior manager on my team, what I'm looking for every single one is, do you have the ability to ask the important questions of the stakeholders, say what are you really looking for here, and what tools do we have in our toolbox in order to get you what you need?
I love that. There's a couple of things. I heard two really good frameworks there that you talked through, Sam, the kind of self-service, full service, and upskilling. I think that's a really nice way to think about the team and kind of breaking out the team. And the other one I heard was, you went through kind of a maturity of access to reliability, to answering questions, to then digging deeper in partnership. And I think that's a really nice way to put that kind of maturity skill that a lot of teams have to go through. Is it's really hard to do people analytics without the data. And so you got to kind of nail down some of that first before you can kind of get to that deeper spot. But that's fantastic. So for everyone on the call, please be thinking about kind of questions you might want to be asking. We're going to dig into the role next, and then a little bit more about kind of future trends. Then we'll open it up to Q&A. And for those of you who have asked questions so far, thank you. For those of you who have answered questions so far, thank you. And Bethany, thank you for answering questions and being on the panel. You've somehow managed to multitask, which I really appreciate.
I promise him I was listening.
You did a good job. You did a good job doing both. Okay, so let me throw a question out there, because I think Bethany needs a question. Can you share the role you're currently hiring for? And could you talk about how success could look different for them than the rest of the team, or maybe how they fit into the rest of the team too?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I haven't taken very many IO psychology courses, but I'm an expert in IO psychology. I would say, like, I'm not one, but I play one on TV, right? We're on Zoom, so I play one on TV. I'm really looking for someone that has that IO background, that has the rigor, the depth of knowledge around what does IO truly look at, and someone that really just gets curious about data, that's willing to get together and put together those white papers that I talked about. So I think for us is I'm not looking for a specific profile. I'm not looking for a clone. I'm really looking for someone that meets the team with where we are and adds a level of incremental value to what we have on our team. So someone that can, gets excited about employee survey data, that ties employee survey data with HRIS data, that isn't scared if I ask them to test for statistical significance. And can you explain what that means? The basics of people analytics, but applying it in a true research perspective, going beyond just operationally to how do we think about data differently? Someone calls us and say, hey, I want to run a survey. They can have a point of view around, well, that's a good question. That's probably not so good question. Here's how we would think about it. That can act as that consultant for how are we thinking about this type of research work that's being done. So I mentioned consulting a couple of times. That communication is really important around being able to take something super complex and put it into words that a business leader or an HR leader, I use those separately because sometimes our business leaders really understand data and our HR leaders don't understand data, or vice versa. Everybody can really understand what you're talking about there, and you can make your points clearly and concisely and kind of get momentum and impact around what are we asking for, and comes with that credibility that we need.
That's super helpful. Yeah, I really liked what you said about not looking for a clone. Like you're really looking for something incremental and kind of a puzzle piece there. That's a good mindset to have towards hiring.
Yeah.
Sam, the same question to you. Could you talk about the role you're hiring for and how success might look a little different for them or similar for them?
Yeah, I think the position that we're looking for is actually somewhat similar to Bethany. I'll put that out there. If life-saving drugs is your thing, then and go to Bethany. If keeping the
then you
world
have to put
working,
up with me too.
we like to say we keep the world working. Okay, so we've got a
They're both
good,
fantastic roles.
a pretty good mission too. No, but it's sort of similar to what Bethany was discussing. This is really going to be a research heavy role. And the reason I already touched upon, why we want to move in that direction, just as where we are on our maturity curve, but it's also because so many of us on our team have had to wear so many different hats, especially as I'm the one person on our team actually currently with formal training when it comes to research methodology. And boy, let me tell you, it's really hard to do an attrition modeling project when you're getting pinged throughout the day asking questions about insights you've derived or a white paper or a dashboard. And so we're hoping that this person will, their focus really will be on that advanced analytics deep dive research to free up the rest of the team. Obviously, coming from an IO background, I know the rigor that those programs provide when it comes to research methodology. But at the end of the day, I'm very open to anyone that has either formal training or experience when it comes to stats and research methods, whether that's a data science background, a math background, stats, quantitative psychology. Where I certainly don't want to pigeonhole this role into a certain profile. In terms of the success of this role, I will reiterate what I said before, which is even though I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I'm describing this as research heavy. This person will be responsible for the full life cycle of a research project, which means scoping with stakeholders up front, obviously conducting the analysis, but then also generating insights and sharing those actionable insights back to the stakeholders. This is going to sound maybe a little bit reductive and simple, but my hope for this role is that it will help us derive more answers and become smarter. We've done really good at providing information to our stakeholders, but not always providing answers to the questions that we get about either causal relationships, why is something happening, and what I've noticed is that by not getting to that point, we sort of recycle a lot of the same questions year over year. And I want to see our team be able to say, what my favorite thing to do is when we, for those deep dive research projects that we have taken on, when someone asks the question, say, we've tackled this and we're very confident that this is the answer. We have no reason to believe that the reasons why, you know, we see this trend has changed, and we don't need to rerun you know, this project. We have this answer, we can put on a shelf. Now we can move on to something else. And so I'm really hoping that you know, whoever fills this role will help us solidify some answers and overall become smarter, and not just relaying more information, but better information to our stakeholders.
And one thing that you were talking about that made me think about it was, I mentioned the white papers that we do. I do that to proactively myth bust things that are coming across. You know, somebody read this article, and so that applies to everything. And to be able to have a point of view that says, you know, that may have worked over there. That's not what we see here. So it provides that avenue for either stuff that we're noticing in the data, or allows us to reflect and say, here's how it shows up here. That might be different, or yeah, it's the same everywhere. It doesn't really matter. But I liked what you were saying around how do we get in front of it? How do we think about that? How do we consult and provide our point of view around it?
We just started doing quarterly white papers too. That you said you're at monthly, so
Well, I'm not sure I should have signed up for monthly.
Yeah.
We have a monthly newsletter that goes out, so like we'll just give you a spot. So it now goes out monthly.
That's too funny. It's really helpful hearing you both talk about this, because I think this is an example where on paper these two roles might look pretty similar in a job description. And for people watching this, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, because but hearing both of you talk about it and getting that kind of rich context about what these roles are and what they do and how they're interacting with the teams, there's really wonderful differences between the two roles and the kind of nuances around kind of how each one plays with different parts of the team. And I'm sure there's people on the call here too that are like, I want to be in both places at once, because I think they're both very fascinating spots to be. I'll say now too, for those of you on the call that might not be on the job market, but if you know some people, this is a great time to think about those referrals. If you've got people in mind that we could send to Sam, that we could send to Bethany, that we can make sure we staff them with the absolute best people in the people analytics space, that would be really wonderful. And Sam and Bethany, where can people reach you if they wanted to send you a referral, if they wanted to learn more about the role you just talked about?
LinkedIn for me is the best. Just send me a message and I can forward you, or we can connect offline. But that's the easiest way to contact me.
Same. As far as I know, I think I'm the only Sam Warlove on LinkedIn, so it shouldn't be a problem. And I would encourage anyone, you know, who's either sending referrals or thinking about applying to do so sooner rather than later. You know, we have started sourcing candidates, so you know, don't want you to miss the opportunity for sure.
That's wonderful. So I've got one more question for you both, and then I've got a bunch of questions that have been put into the Q&A and into the chat so far. But just a reminder for anyone who's on the call, please drop your questions in there. This group of panelists is spectacular. I'm sure they'd be open for kind of anything you want to throw their way in terms of people analytics or their careers or things on their teams, what they're getting up to. So don't be shy, please put some questions in. But okay, so I got one more question for you. It's a little bit of a big one. But the question is, what are emerging trends or challenges you see in people analytics for the remainder of 2023? And why don't we cap it there? So let's look at kind of like the next 9 months here, 6 months here. 2023 is going faster than I expected, yeah. Especially considering the impact of technology and the economic factors that are kind of going on at play. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I can start, Bethany. You know, for 2023, I love this question, by the way, Richard. I'll try to leave some airspace for Bethany too.
Thank you.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that come to mind. The first, obviously, it's impossible to ignore the idea of a recession. You know, when I think of that and how it can affect the work that our team is doing and other teams is, the simplest way to describe it is I just think that the nature of the questions that will come to our team change a little bit. You know, I think the good news, well, I don't know if it's good news, but there is a lot of research and literature out there about the effects of recessions on employees, and we've already started getting ahead of it to sort of help our business partners say, you know, if depending upon the way the market goes, here's what we should expect in terms of turnover, engagement, employee well-being. I think some of those questions, our team, something that I want our team to be aware of is we might not have had to tackle necessarily in the past. And I think other people analytics teams maybe aren't as comfortable answering with the effects of employee mental health, financial well-being, the impact of a recession there, and not just traditional things like business outcomes and turnover and engagement. So that's certainly one. I just think the questions that will come to our team will look a little bit different. And then the two other things is just, with where we are with natural language processing, our team is running out of excuses when it comes to providing qualitative insights. We've started to, we don't have the sort of the competency in our team right now to do a lot of that work, but we're starting to partner with our data science team to upskill ourselves and really understand what our options are to provide more qualitative insights, because it's going to get to the point where it's like, I don't know why, I think analytics, that's going to just become an expectation of all analytics teams. The good news, however, that I will say, the last thing that I'll mention is, I think with the rise of ChatGPT and other tools, my hope, this isn't necessarily 2023, it might be a little bit more down the road, but my hope is that with our stakeholders being able to more easily access foundational information about interpreting metrics, we will spend less time explaining things like, here's the purpose of turnover, here's what it's measuring, and be able to jump straight to how it applies to our business context. Because we admittedly do spend a lot of time hand-holding and upskilling and just getting that foundational understanding of data literacy. And if people take advantage of the tools available to understand not what's happening with our data, but just these general concepts within analytics, that we'll be able to invest more time in and impact, and jumping straight to, okay, here's what this means within Grainger.
That's a really interesting takeaway for generative AI, that it might assist with the data literacy that then lets you just jump forward to the things that matter. I love that perspective. I'll say too, I think you hit our bingo word for the series here, which is qualitative insights. That's come on almost every single call, which is interesting, because I think everyone's starting to just think about it a little differently with the rise of tools and technologies that are out there. And Saya Slum gets the star sticker in the chat for doubling down on qualitative data. Bethany, would love to hear your predictions for the rest of 2023 and what's coming down the pipe for us.
I wish I had a crystal ball. I feel like I'm going to go back to, like, where were we when dashboarding became a thing? When it went from being manual reports to now it's interactive, and you have single source of truth data sets that you're building off of. I feel like we're at a similar inflection point. So maybe not by end of 2023, maybe a year or two out from there. It's how do we make work more efficient? How do we make employee experience equitable and enable people to perform at their best? I feel like we're on this turning point for leveraging technology as a whole and how people do their work. Selfishly also, how can I do less of the stuff I don't want to do? So I'm looking forward to the day that I can have something else write my one pager. I can kind of put the data and the insights I have in there, and then it can generate interesting side notes and quips and quotes, so that I can kind of focus on the data and the story, and that can be kind of pushing it out there as well. So selfishly, I'd like to, once we get the technology, to how do we be able to leverage it? I think People Insights, again, we're seeing that evolution, we're seeing that maturity, getting more access to data, external market data, having this more open relationship with other companies, and sharing of what does great look like. I think the legislative part is also interesting. So we haven't talked about the fun parts of the legal part, from a data privacy perspective, from local laws around pay transparency. How are we getting ahead of that? So how do we get ahead of it? How do we make sure that we have our own point of view on it, that we're not kind of chasing whatever country or whatever state is putting together things, but we're doing things for the right reason? So I see this as a a time of great opportunity within the HR space. And I would tell you that I'm a part of most of those conversations, or someone from my team is a part of most of those conversations. How do we do it? How do we do it in the right way? How do we do it in a way that's sustainable? How do we make sure we have data that's accurate? And so I feel like now, as we talk about where are those opportunities to add impact, I feel like we're in the middle of one. And so how do we add impact now, and continue that momentum into next year?
That's a big one, especially that regulatory one. It's good to hear you're kind of in those, as we all should strive to be in those conversations as they're happening.
I don't know that you want to be.
It's less fun to be in them after they've already happened.
Exactly.
So
that's my whole thing. Call me early.
Yeah, no, but it's a big one. And that's something that could happen this year, where I think it could have happened 2 or 3 years out before. With the rise of generative AI, I think we're going to see more push to actually have something close out this year. So that's something I'm tracking too. So thank you both to the panelists for the questions we've asked so far. We've got a couple questions from the crowd. For folk that are still out there interested, please drop your questions into the Q&A or into the comment section. I've got them both open over here. But here's the first one from Vivian Lee. She said, Bethany, I'm very interested in knowing where you pull external benchmark data from. And if you could talk a little bit, and Sam, if you want to chime in here too about kind of external benchmarks or ways you bring benchmarking into the conversation.
Yeah, and I don't want to name any vendor names, but there are vendors out there that will be able to tell you external benchmarks, things like that. We do things a little bit organically. It kind of depends on the question that's coming at you, right? I don't have one single source of truth for everything. The question that comes in, it might take a Bethany sort of, how do we think about that? And then bring all the different external benchmarking data sources together in one. The two that I mentioned in my response though are, I'm a member of a group called People Analytics Consortium. And that really is a member-driven organization that brings together about 25 different companies that are all in the space. We do external best practice sharing. We also do benchmarks available to that. So that's one that I leverage heavily for the relationships, but also for the data aspect of it. And then for the employee survey, employee listening side of things, we're a member of Mayflower Group. And that's a little bit bigger. It's about 45, 50 companies that come together and share similar things more in the listening space around that.
I'll just add, because I think I probably get, is there a external benchmark for this question more than any other any other question from our stakeholders. Very similar to Bethany, a variety of sources, but we've also just changed our point of view on how we leverage external benchmarks. Especially we're in an industry, we're in a very specific industry. We don't have a lot of direct competitors, so we're also in a little bit of a tough space there. But we sort of have a new point of view and a framework in terms of the value of external benchmarks versus internal benchmarks and external sensing, and so that's been really helpful for us, is just to have a united point of view across our team and within HR to say, here's what's available, but here's the value of it. When a benchmark isn't available, here's what we can do instead.
That's a really great take, and I like both of you kind of took the it depends, which is a very valid answer. Sometimes it's a hard one to say, and I think people don't like it, but it does, and to do this right, because there's not perfect benchmarks out there. And a lot of times it's the unique nuances of your own company and how do you actually make that happen. It's kind of a cobbling together of a lot of things. But yeah, I appreciate you both taking a stab at it, even though it is this sort of it depends sort of answer out there. So the next question, we have a question from Melissa Laracella. She said, I have a strong 15-year HRBP career, self-taught in analytics. My leaders, VP and above, love that I lead with data, but by no means can say I'm an expert or an analyst. I feel like the job descriptions that are lateral for me require way more analytics experience than I have at this point, but I want to make the data jump at some time. Any advice to make the data jump from someone who's people facing? I could kick this one off for what it's worth. I'm a former HRBP. So I was kind of in the data, before I was in my data roles, my entrance in HR was as an HRBP. And I think some of my best people analytics work was actually as an HRBP navigating with the people analytics team. So there's a lot you can do, even as an HR business partner, kind of having that, like creating the space for people analytics, working with and learning from those teams. So if you have a team internally, reaching out to them and being that absolute best partner is a great place to be. I also think a lot about articulating how you're buying people analytics in a really good way. So when you bring data into the picture and kind of make change with it, that's actually the hardest part of people analytics. I'd say there's there's a lot of data folk out there that can get the data out, can get the data organized, but to actually make change with data, that's the hardest part of being part of this people analytics field. So I think it sounds like you've got that part down, and it's more about articulating the story from there and helping kind of find that right move in. And Melissa, please feel free to reach out to me too. I'd be happy to talk to you more. But Sam and Bethany, what are your takes on this one?
I would say that's the toughest part. The thing that you have experienced is the toughest part to learn. And it takes time and it takes being close to the business. And that's something that you can't learn on a YouTube video. You can learn how to calculate statistical significance on a YouTube video. You can't learn how to manage relationships with business leaders, how to speak the language of the business. So I think you're kind of perfectly positioned for that. Of course, there are certifications that you can take to do that. I don't look for anybody that has a specific profile in mind. I look for people that are curious, that like to learn. A lot of times I get asked a question and I don't know the answer to it, but I can jump in and I can Google with the best of them. How do you think about it? What's your approach? What's your research? And it's not just learning research, but how do you ask those right questions? The questions that can unlock there. And then you have time to build up some of that data analytics expertise. I think one thing that I always, when I think through, not hiring a clone of mine is, find a team that has somebody on there that knows that. I think the most successful people that I've seen in the HR that have gone from being HR business partners to being in the people analytics field, they have a team member that's really strong at the analytics, and they do kind of I'll teach you this part, you teach me this part collaboration. And so it really is, you're building a team. You're not building a team of clones, complementary skill sets, and you can all learn from each other. Right? Like that would never be a red flag for me. I think that's actually a benefit. And if you think about it like that, is that you learn the part, you have experience in the part that's really hard to learn. You're at a benefit.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Both great answers. The only other thing I'll tack on to say is if you have the opportunity to speak to a hiring manager and dig into the job description and not necessarily take it purely at face value of how heavy the stats part of an analytics job is, I think it's worth it. I'm always reluctant to trust job descriptions at their face value, which is why I love having the opportunity to speak directly, to people about the role that we're actually looking for. And I think just having an understanding of, okay, what percent of this role is actually, using R, Python, SPSS, whatever the tool is. If that is a deficiency, is that really going to hold me back? How much time would I need to really upskill myself there? But I wouldn't discount yourself to the points that Richard and Bethany already made just because it's listed in the job description.
Spot on. Bethany, a quick one for you. Are you open to someone outside the US to recruit?
So we are open to it. We're just starting our search. I had my first meeting with our recruiter today. We really just want to find the best candidate. So please feel free to apply and we'll see where we go from there.
That's great. And Sam, I saw you put yours in the chat. Thank you for that. Hybrid preferred with the opportunity to be remote. That's great. So I think we're down to our final question here from Greg Nakamura. He says, Bethany, as you look to improving organizational efficiency, how do skills and capabilities get incorporated? And how do you link skills to outputs and results?
Ooh, that is
a big question.
$1 million question. How much time do we have?
About 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not going to be able to. I won't even be able to scratch the surface on that. I think. Again, this is the precipice. In the conversations, I was able to meet Richard, and I saw Sam last week at TALREOS, and this was part of that conversation there around, what does the skills framework of the future look like, and who are going to be the people in your organization that think about it, that approach it. I know that, within my team, we're kind of on the periphery of it. I actually have some business functions that are driving it. So my IT department is hot and heavy right now on how do we look at jobs? How do we think about skills? And so at this point right now, again, I'm not going to be able to solve it for everybody. I'm partnering with them. Let's make sure that they're doing it the right way. Let me learn from them. They can move a lot faster than I can just from a capacity standpoint. They put some really smart people on understanding what it means for them. I'm kind of just waiting and listening and ready to learn on what do they do there before I can form an opinion of how that works at AbbVie. I think the other thing that I will mention is, I mentioned some of the other companies that I've been to before. Every approach at every company is different. And so how do you think about what trends are happening? And then how do you look at the external market, what other companies are doing? and then internalize it into a way that makes the most sense for the company that you're at now. Where are you at? Where is your leadership team at? Where can you influence? Realistically, how far can you get in what time frame? And then place some bets. You know, where can I see success? What partnerships do I need? What sponsor do I need? How do I lean into that more to get to where we're at? So I don't know the answer to your question.
Yeah, Greg, I'll say it's definitely $1 million question. Like I hope it doesn't come across that I was laughing at the question, because it's truly
No.
a question I think is on
He was
everybody's
laughing
mind
at
right
me
now.
for trying to answer it.
Yeah, but it's really a tremendously important question. But there's a lot of use cases I think being touted in the market right now, some of which are real and some of which are noise. We haven't gotten through this phase where we're actually figuring out, well, where can we actually use these things well, and where are we just trying to use them because we're trying to use them. It's sort of in this like universal panacea sort of moment where everything gets fixed by skills. And it's like, we all know that's not true. Like some things are going to be fixed by skills and some things are not. And I think we're going to have to let that settle before we really see what happens here. But I think everyone out there should be really questioning and thinking about skills in an interesting way, because the business is, but being cautious too. And sorry, Sam, did you have anything to add there?
No, you hit the nail on the head for sure. As someone who's a student of job analysis, you know, I can appreciate certainly the value of skills when a job and teams are analyzed correctly to truly understand them, and not as just a check the box exercise to say, we know all the skills that everyone has. So I'll just leave it at that.
Perfect. Well, everybody, this comes to the end of our hour. A big round of applause for Bethany and Sam. I don't think you're able to take yourselves off mute, but just if you drop something in the chat, I know they'll see it. Sam and Bethany, thank you both for being on, for chatting with us today. We'll make sure we share the links out afterwards too. Please, anyone in the chat, please send referrals their way. They're looking forward to people. They'll be checking their inboxes. There we go. A whole bunch of thanks coming through in the chat here. And everybody be on the lookout for the next one. We're still scheduling what our next session will be, but stay tuned. And we'll get another one of these together soon. Dan, Bethany, thank you. Derek, thank you as always too for putting these together.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for coming and asking good questions.
Thank you. Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.